Hi, I'm Matto, aka Matt Shell, and in this video I want to continue the video series on my conceptual art project, Night Run, that is currently in production. I want to use this video to talk about one of the influences on the project, which is the artwork of Virgil Abloh. For those who aren't familiar with Abloh's work, he's best known for his fashion brand Off-White, his collaboration as a creative director with Kanye West, and most recently as the creative director for the luxury fashion brand Louis Vuitton. So while Abloh is most well known and probably most influential as a fashion designer, he framed his own kind of holistic artistic practice as a conceptual art practice, and including kind of very self-consciously making references to things like the work of Marcel Duchamp, who famously put a urinal into an art gallery and said, "This is a piece of art," kind of exploding the boundaries of what could and couldn't be art, basically by saying, "This is art because I say it is." And Abloh took that idea and kind of extended it to this broad range of cultural activities, including fashion design, DJing, his collaboration with IKEA, making rugs and furniture, which was the only time you saw like a bunch of hype beasts lining up outside IKEA. And then, sadly, near the end of his life, because he recently passed away, packaging all of that into a series of museum exhibits, first in Chicago and then most recently at the Brooklyn Museum here in New York, an exhibit that I just recently visited and which is part of the reason why it's kind of top of mind for me. Placing all of this work together, saying, "This is my artistic practice, I am a conceptual artist," and putting it in a museum is, I think, that kind of Duchampian gesture of taking what are similar to kind of ready-made objects, sneakers, garments for Louis Vuitton, objects for IKEA, and putting those together and saying, "This is all one thing, this is what I'm doing." And he very self-consciously said, I recently read an interview between him and the artist Maurizio Cattelan, who famously taped the banana to the wall in the gallery. They had an interview together, and Virgil said, "My goal is to leave the space wider for the artists who come behind me, to expand the circle of what we can do and say is art." And I think that's a powerful statement, because what I'm interested in, now coming back to Night Run, is creating artwork that is both in conversation with art history, elite or avant-garde, sort of educated fine art culture, being aware of that and trying to reach out and be in some kind of conversation or exchange with that, while also working with the most culturally relevant objects of the current era, which for someone like me are video games, NFTs, and YouTube videos, none of which you traditionally would see in a museum context. All of these things are disreputable, low culture, almost subcultural categories. And this is kind of where I see a resonance with Virgil's work, because his work is really strongly informed by hip hop culture, graffiti culture, skateboarding. Growing up in Rockford, Illinois, and in the kind of Chicago area, he was immersed in these youth subcultures, brought that obviously into his fashion practice, brought that into his engagement with hip hop, but then he was also educated as an architect, and so had this connection to the high culture intellectual layer, and was very self-consciously trying to move back and forth between these two layers. He had this kind of conceptual framing of tourist versus purist, and he was trying to say, hey, let's break these borders, let's travel back and forth across these borders, and let's put these things that traditionally, like a sneaker manufactured by Nike, let's put that in a museum, let's put that in an art gallery, let's call that a work of art, or let's work with IKEA, right, this kind of global behemoth of low-cost furniture, and let's create some things which are kind of interesting and culturally relevant art objects But within this mechanism of global capitalism, supply chains, factories, and the cultural production of globalized furniture making. I think there's this really interesting question of using the available materials and using those materials to create something that is culturally relevant. Maybe people will see what he was doing as pretentious. Obviously, you can disagree and critique, but I think the thing that you cannot really strongly disagree with is that his work, whether it was with Off-White, Nike, Louis Vuitton, IKEA, this work was tremendously culturally relevant. It's really part of the cultural conversation, and especially part of the cultural conversation among those who are not typical consumers of elite, avant-garde, fine art, high culture. He is taking the factory and supply chain production network of Nike, producing something that we could call an artwork, but that is also intensely coveted by hype beasts, sneaker flippers, and teenagers around the entire world. I think that there's something really important there in creating objects and artifacts that are in conversation with what is contemporarily relevant. Abloh is really closely associated with the quote-unquote streetwear movement, and I think is kind of responsible for turning the streetwear movement into this much more of a platform for ideas than it ever was, and kind of saying, hey, streetwear can also be something which has aspirations of being avant-garde. It actually can be something much more kind of intellectually aspirational. And working within the media of today, working within the materials and channels and spaces that are relevant to people of my generation, people of the younger generation, building things that use the language of subculture, that use the media of the internet, mass capitalist production, street style, and everything that that means, and taking that and saying, yes, and this too is art, and this too is part of our artistic cultural history, and this is relevant and this is important. For whatever reason, I've always found myself on the side of trying to assert that these kind of disreputable corners of culture, which I find very rich with ideas, whether that is science fiction writing, graffiti, video games, Japanese anime, things that are kind of seen as juvenile, or maybe, and obviously can be juvenile and can be boring, but that also have these flashes of brilliance and that should be considered as part of the respected cultural canon. I'm always drawn to those corners of the culture and always wanting to say, hey, this is important too, and this should be part of the cultural conversation too. This is kind of at the heart of what I'm trying to do with Night Run, of saying, yes, this is a video game. Yes, this is a NFT project. Yes, it's a series of YouTube videos. And this is a work of conceptual art. This is in conversation with the history of conceptual art, going back to Marcel Duchamp, and this is an artwork because I say it is. That's a good place to stop. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because we are here on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.